the hidden history of these 2,000-year-old scrolls has required 21st century technology.
For about 2,000 years, a single sheet of papyrus lay silent, its words fading, its meaning buried by time. Priests once called it forbidden. Scholars later called it unreadable. Now, after centuries of silence, AI has translated its final missing lines, and what it reveals is terrifyingly familiar and even predicts a dreary future. The Oracle of the Lamb: How a Lost Egyptian Papyrus Found Its Voice Again. Over 2,000 years ago, an Egyptian scribe took a sheet of papyrus made from the tall plants that grew along the Nile and began to write. That same sheet still exists today, brown and fragile. Modern museums call it P. Vienna D10,000, but scholars know it by its real name, the Oracle of the Lamb. It's written in Demotic script and kept today in Vienna, inside the papyrus collection of the Austrian National Library. Demotic was the everyday writing style of ancient Egypt, quick, flowing, and used for almost 1,000 years. It grew from older Egyptian scripts and stayed in use from about the 7th century BC to the 5th century after. The letters run together, their shapes tight and curved. Because no two hands are exactly alike, today's readers rely on two major tools. One is the Chicago Demotic Dictionary, a massive reference full of every known word, its meaning, and where it was used. The other is the Thesaurus Linguae Egyptiae, an online library filled with thousands of Egyptian texts written in hieroglyphs, hieratic, and demotic. It's like a search engine for ancient writing. You can type in a word and instantly see where else it appears and how it was used. Now, artificial intelligence has joined that toolkit. Deep learning programs trained on thousands of scanned papyri can spot faint traces of ink, complete missing strokes, and even suggest lost words by pattern. In Vienna, these AI systems help experts restore and translate lines of the Oracle of the Lamb that were once too damaged to read. Together, these tools act like a map and compass for anyone trying to make sense of a papyrus that hasn't been read for centuries. This papyrus now belongs to one of the largest collections of ancient writing on Earth, the Vienna Papyrus Collection. It isn't just a dusty storeroom, it's a huge archive that holds about 180,000 objects, covering 3,000 years of Egypt's history. Inside are royal decrees, family letters, contracts, school notes, and temple prayers, written in languages like Greek, Coptic, Arabic, Latin, and Egyptian. Because the collection is so big and valuable, UNESCO listed it in its Memory of the World Register in 2001, which is like a global honor roll for the most important historical documents on Earth. So how did a sheet written in Roman Egypt end up in Austria? In the late 1800s, Egypt's deserts started revealing long-lost towns, and dealers began selling papyrus bundles to museums and collectors. The dry sand had protected these pages for thousands of years. One of the biggest buyers was Archduke Rainer of Austria, who in the early 1880s purchased a massive collection of papyri. In 1899, he gave everything to Emperor Franz Joseph, who added it to the National Library. By 1999, the collection had its own public museum inside the Neueburg wing at Heldenplatz, where visitors could finally see these treasures, including the Oracle of the Lamb, safely displayed behind glass. As for where it was first written, researchers point to a temple town in Egypt's Fayum region called Sokno Payo Nesos, also known as Dime. This small settlement was famous for its scribes during the Greek and Roman periods and produced hundreds of Demotic writings. Many of those ended up in European libraries after being sold in the 19th century. According to the Trismegistos database, a kind of global catalog for ancient texts, this papyrus likely came from that same town. Sokno Payo Nesos was not just another desert village. It was a lively temple community filled with professional scribes who copied prayers, stories, and legal documents every day. Studies of handwriting from that area show the same patterns, the same curves and strokes, appearing across many different papyri. That consistency lets modern experts identify where a papyrus was written, even if no one recorded its exact find spot. Now to the papyrus itself. It's fragile, light as dried leaves, yet still marked by the hand that made it. Papyrus sheets were made by cutting the stalks of the plant into thin strips, laying them in two crossing layers, pressing them together, and letting them dry in the sun. Scribes used reed brushes dipped in black ink made from soot. Under a microscope, you can see the thin plant fibers crisscrossing under the writing, with ink sitting on the top layer. In the Roman period, scribes wrote in neat, even lines, leaving small margins on each side to keep their work balanced. Every part of the Oracle of the Lamb fits that same careful style. Of course, 2,000 years of desert life took its toll. The edges of the papyrus are chipped, the corners are curled, and many letters have faded. To keep it safe, conservators sandwich it between solid, clear panels, usually glass, so the sheet stays flat and untouched. Each time a papyrus is handled, its fibers weaken, so modern preservation tries to limit any physical contact. Dating the Oracle of the Lamb is refreshingly simple because the scribe actually wrote the date himself. Year 33 of Augustus. Historians convert that to the year 4 AD. The only question that remains is what that scribe meant when he wrote the mysterious words of the Oracle of the Lamb, and what those words meant to the people of ancient Egypt who once believed in them. The prophecy of a world turned upside down. Reading this old Egyptian page feels like hearing a calm but serious voice from the past. The writer is saying something has gone very wrong. The world has lost its balance. Holy places are falling apart, the wrong people are in charge, and the land feels controlled by strangers. Every line makes it clear. Life in Egypt had flipped upside down. The voice in the story belongs to a lamb. In Egyptian belief, a lamb symbolized Khnum, the god who shaped human life on a potter's wheel. In this text, the lamb speaks to a man named Pasenhor and gives him a warning. Egypt's temples, which were once the heartbeat of the country, have fallen into chaos. But temples weren't just for prayer. They stored food, paid workers, and managed time itself through festivals and rituals. When the temples fell, food, money, and faith all began to collapse together. That's why the prophecy begins there. When the center of daily life breaks, everything else falls apart with it. Then comes one of the most striking lines. The ruler becomes the ruled. That doesn't just mean someone lost their power. It means the entire order of the world has been reversed. The one who should lead now takes orders. The text repeats this idea over and over, as if turning a cracked pot in the light to show every break. When the top falls, everything below it shakes. The writer wants you to feel the full shock of a world turned upside down. The text also points fingers at outsiders. It names the Medes, an old Egyptian word for Persians, and says, "The Greeks will take the white crown." That crown, tall and white, was the symbol of kingship in Upper Egypt. In other words, the writer is saying that foreigners have taken Egypt's power and glory. Its crown, its throne, and its pride now belong to strangers. For ordinary Egyptians, this would feel like watching their daily world fall apart a little more each day. Behind every line sits an old Egyptian belief about how life should work. Everything depends on two forces, Mat and Isfet. Mat means truth, order, and balance, when everything runs the way it's meant to. Isfet means chaos, when the world slides off its track. The prophecy doesn't offer a hero or a solution. It doesn't tell you how to fix things. It only shows you what it feels like when everything is wrong. And that is where the text suddenly feels modern. The Oracle describes a time when power is abused, when truth is ignored, and when people feel their world no longer makes sense. Feelings that echo across centuries. When economies crumble, when leaders seem detached from their people, or when faith in institutions collapses, the same theme repeats itself. The papyrus becomes less of a relic and more of a mirror, a reminder that every age faces its own version of disorder. That's why it still hits hard today. The ancient scribe's warning about imbalance could easily describe moments in our own world, when justice falters, when corruption spreads, or when people lose trust in what once felt sacred. It could describe any time or place where power loses its way, and ordinary people feel the world sliding beneath them. Its goal isn't to comfort, it's to make you recognize that feeling. It's Egypt's 2,000-year-old way of saying, when chaos rises, balance must return, or history will repeat itself. If you can sense that imbalance, the text has done its job. But the Lamb's warning wasn't the only one written in Egypt's time of turmoil. The Potter's Oracle, Egypt's hidden rebellion against its Greek king. When one prophecy ends, another begins. The Oracle of the Lamb warned of a world collapsing under foreign rule, and for Egypt, that warning came true. But what followed wasn't silence. Another voice rose from the dust, not from a priest or a king, but from the hands of a simple craftsman. Imagine a quiet workshop in ancient Egypt. A man stands at his potter's wheel, his hands coated in wet clay. But today, he isn't making bowls or jars. He's speaking to a king. This craftsman, the potter, is warning the ruler about what's coming, what will happen to Egypt and to a proud new city by the sea. That story is known today as the Oracle of the Potter. It was first written more than 2,000 years ago. The version we have now is in Greek, but notes in the manuscripts say it was translated from Egyptian. That fits perfectly with how people lived then. Many Egyptians spoke both languages, Greek and Egyptian. Historians think the original version was written sometime in the 3rd century BC, during Egypt's Greek period. The surviving copies we have were made later, when the Romans ruled Egypt. To understand why this ancient text hits so hard, you have to picture Egypt at that time. After Alexander the Great conquered the region, a Greek royal family called the Ptolemies took the throne. They ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, not from Thebes or Memphis, but from a brand new capital on the coast, Alexandria. Alexandria was dazzling. It had the biggest harbor in the Mediterranean, marble temples, Greek theaters, and the famous Library of Alexandria, where scholars from across the world came to study. But for native Egyptians, life in this new order felt complicated. Their country was still Egypt, but power now spoke Greek. Priests, scribes, and farmers had to work under rulers who didn't look like them, didn't sound like them, and didn't always honor their gods. The Oracle of the Potter became the voice of those Egyptians who felt left out, people who loved their land but no longer recognized who was running it. The Oracle calls the Greeks belt wearers. It's not a compliment. It's a mocking nickname that marks them as outsiders. The text also ties them to Typhon, a giant monster in Greek myth, whom Egyptians linked to Set, their own god of storms, desert, and chaos. In other words, the Potter is saying, these new rulers bring disorder wherever they go. The tone is sharp, angry, and honest. The setup of the story is simple but powerful. A potter, clearly a symbol of Khnum, the Egyptian creator god who made life from clay, speaks directly to King Amenophis. The story says the king writes the words down and reveals them to all men. That one line turns a private warning into a public statement. This is no secret prophecy whispered in shadows. It's a message meant for everyone. Then come the visions that make this text unforgettable. The belt wearers, meaning the Greeks, will destroy each other. The great city they built, Alexandria, will be left empty. Its protector, Agathos Daemon, shown as a great serpent, will leave. And another god, Hephaestus, will return to his old home in Memphis, the country's ancient capital near the Nile. In just a few sentences, the prophecy tears glory away from Alexandria and hands it back to Memphis, back to Egypt's true heart. The names of the gods in the story show how much Greek and Egyptian culture had blended together by then. People used Greek names for Egyptian gods all the time. Hephaestus was the Greek name for Ptah, the creator and craftsman god of Memphis. Agathos Daemon, the protective spirit of Alexandria, was the Greek version of Shai, Egypt's god of fate. The writer mixes the two languages on purpose. He's speaking to both sides, the Greeks and the Egyptians, using names that everyone would recognize. Then, with a twist, he turns that mix against the Greek rulers. Even the gods, he says, will side with Egypt and leave the foreigners to their ruin. But the Potter never says Egypt will defeat them in war. He says they'll destroy themselves. Their empire will fall apart from the inside. That's why historians describe the Oracle of the Potter as anti-Ptolemaic, a protest wrapped in prophecy. It's not just anger, it's a plan. The story moves in 3 clean steps. It names who's guilty. It shows how they'll fall. It promises that order will return to Egypt. The survival of the text tells its own story. Several Greek copies were found on papyrus, and at least 2 show clear signs of editing. Some researchers believe one version was rewritten after the revolt of Harsiessus around 132 to 130 BC, when a local Egyptian leader tried to take back control of the south. That shows people didn't just read this oracle once and forget it. They went back to it whenever Egypt faced new trouble. It was like an old song people sang again, every time life turned upside down. Centuries later, coins from Alexandria still showed the image of Agathos Daemon, the snake spirit crowned with royal symbols. That tells us how deeply the city's identity was tied to that protector. But Egypt's struggle didn't end with rebellion. It was also recorded, judged, and remembered. The Demotic Chronicle, how Egypt judged the kings who ruled it. Long after the Potter's warning faded, Egypt kept writing, not in anger this time, but in judgment. When rebellion gave way to reflection, another scribe picked up the reed pen to record what the gods themselves might have thought of the kings who ruled. That sheet is known today as the Demotic Chronicle. It's one of the few surviving papyri written entirely in Demotic. This particular papyrus sits in Paris, inside the National Library of France, catalogued as Papyrus Demotique 215. Most scholars agree it was written sometime in the 3rd century BC, during the reign of Ptolemy III, a Greek ruler of Egypt. The text itself pretends to come from the age of an earlier king named Teos, but its tone and writing style make it clear. It was composed later, looking back at Egypt's past through the eyes of a new era. How did a piece of Egyptian prophecy end up in France? The story begins with Napoleon's campaign in Egypt at the end of the 18th century. His soldiers and scholars brought home not only battle trophies but scrolls, statues, and papyri. European collectors and museums soon followed their lead. The French National Library built its papyrus collection throughout the 19th century, acquiring Egyptian and Greek texts through purchases, donations, and excavations. The Demotic Chronicle was one of those treasures. Fragile, brown, and cracked, but still legible enough to preserve a priest's moral argument written more than 2,000 years ago. The Chronicle isn't history in the modern sense. It doesn't list years, wars, or taxes. Instead, it reads like a series of short moral judgments, small blocks of text that sound almost like courtroom rulings. Each one delivers a verdict on a ruler, who acted justly, who broke the sacred laws, and who paid the price. The writer's voice feels like that of a temple judge, not a storyteller. For every king, it asks the same question. Did he honor the gods and keep Egypt's laws? If the answer is yes, his reign lasts and the land prospers. If not, his rule collapses. That's the Chronicle's guiding rule. Moral order decides everything. The times it covers are clear. The text looks back to Egypt's last native dynasties, the 28th, 29th, and 30th. The harshest words in the papyrus fall on three Persian kings: Cambyses, who first conquered Egypt; Xerxes, who crushed revolts and stripped temple wealth; and Artaxerxes III, who reconquered Egypt after a brief period of freedom. The Chronicle calls them lawbreakers and desecrators, men who defied the gods and tore apart what was sacred. It doesn't dwell on their armies or victories. It paints them as symbols of arrogance, foreign rulers who mistook power for divine approval and who were punished for it. Finally, it throws one last glance at the new Greek rulers, hinting that they too will fail if they repeat the same mistakes. Running through all of this is a quiet, steady hope. The belief that a native king will rise, repair the damage, and restore balance. But the text never names him. It doesn't tie the promise to a date or a face. That open phrasing was intentional. It kept the prophecy timeless. Every generation that suffered under foreign rule could see its own hope in those lines. Reading the Chronicle isn't easy. The Demotic script is fast, compact, and packed with meaning. Some lines are damaged or missing entirely, so scholars rely on annotated editions and translations that explain each phrase. In Demotic, even a small change, one curve of a pen, can shift the meaning of a line. That's why modern Egyptologists still debate how to interpret certain sections. The Chronicle also plays a clever trick with time. It pretends to be a prophecy from the past, written before the events it describes. But in truth, it talks about things that had already happened by the time it was composed. By using this voice from the past, the author could speak about recent rulers and current politics without being openly rebellious. Instead of saying, "Our Greek kings are corrupt," the text says, "The Medes and wicked kings of old lost everything because they broke the law." The message is clear without being direct. It's an ancient form of coded protest, one that let priests criticize the present while pretending to teach history. Even the papyrus itself tells a story. The Demotic text was written on one side of the sheet, while the other side carries unrelated writings, including a short text about Cambyses, the Persian conqueror. Some researchers even describe the sheet as a palimpsest, meaning it had earlier writing that was scraped off and reused. Traces of faint Greek letters under the Demotic confirm that the papyrus was recycled in Egypt, just like parchment was in later centuries. It probably came from near Memphis, one of Egypt's old religious centers, where scribes often reused writing material. When you read it, you can sense how the writer tried to connect everyday life to royal behavior. He doesn't complain about lost battles. He talks about lost justice. He doesn't mention taxes. He talks about temples stripped of their gold. His examples hit home. If a king violates sacred law, the festivals lose meaning. If he steals from shrines, the priests stop performing rites. When the temples go silent, ordinary people lose their faith, contracts lose value, and courts become corrupt. In that chain of cause and effect, you can see what the writer believed. A bad king isn't just unlucky, he poisons everything. A good king isn't just pious, he keeps the whole country alive. Behind the Chronicle's moral lessons lies a deeper message. Egypt itself is sacred, and its peace depends on harmony between the throne and the gods. Interestingly, the Chronicle doesn't blindly glorify Egyptian kings. It judges them too. Some native rulers earn praise, others fall short. That honesty makes the attack on the Persian and Greek kings stronger. Yet long before all these, one man had already seen Egypt fall apart and pleaded for its order to return. The Ipuwer Papyrus, Egypt's oldest cry for order in a broken world. Even before Egypt judged its kings, someone else had already mourned the collapse of order itself. Long before the Greek rulers, before even the Persians, another voice had risen, one that didn't accuse, but pleaded. It came from the heart of the Middle Kingdom, when Egypt was breaking apart and begging to be made whole again. A long sheet of brown papyrus sits today in the Dutch National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden, covered in quick, flowing Egyptian ink strokes written over 3,000 years ago. It is not carved in stone or drawn in colorful hieroglyphs, but written in hieratic, a faster, cursive form of Egyptian handwriting that scribes used for everyday and literary texts. This single roll is known as the Ipuwer Papyrus. It preserves a famous poem called The Admonitions of Ipuwer. The copy we have was written during Egypt's 19th dynasty, around the 13th century BC, but the poem itself is much older. Most scholars trace it back to the late 12th dynasty in the Middle Kingdom, nearly 500 years earlier. What survives is a later copy of an older masterpiece, carefully rewritten by a New Kingdom scribe who wanted to preserve a classic. The papyrus found its way to Europe in the early 19th century, a time when traders and diplomats were moving ancient treasures out of Egypt. A merchant and diplomat named Giovanni Anastasi bought this particular roll in Egypt and sold it to the Dutch government in 1828. It then entered the Leiden Museum, where it remains one of the oldest literary papyri on display. The papyrus itself is impressively long. Even in its damaged state, it stretches about 378 centimeters, roughly 12 feet 5 inches, and stands about 18 centimeters high, a little more than 7 inches. It is written in black ink, with red markings used for headings or key phrases, a common ancient practice to guide the reader's eye. Time has divided the roll into panels, so in the museum it is displayed across several glass frames. The front side contains the Admonitions of Ipuwer, while the back side holds a separate hymn to the sun. So what does the poem say? It is written as a speech by a man named Ipuwer, who addresses a figure called the Lord of All, likely the reigning king. In simple but haunting words, Ipuwer describes a country turned upside down. The rich are poor, and the poor have taken their place. Servants run away from their masters. The nobles are hungry, tombs are disturbed, fields are barren, and in one unforgettable line, the river is blood. Through this chaos, Ipuwer calls on the ruler to restore what the Egyptians called Ma'at, truth, balance, and right order. For ancient Egyptians, Ma'at was more than an idea. It was the foundation of the universe. When it held firm, the Nile flooded on time, the courts were fair, the temples flourished, and the years of peace added up, as they would say. When Ma'at broke, chaos, called Isfet, took over. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.